The room went silent the moment she said it. "You're too poor to be wearing this." Her words sliced through the air like a blade, sharp and deliberate. My stepmother leaned closer, her lips curled in disgust, her voice low enough that she thought only I could hear it. But cruelty has a way of echoing. Every face in that crowded hall slowly turned toward me. I didn't speak, I didn't blink. I just felt the heat crawl up my neck as shame and old memories burned together in my chest. This was supposed to be a proud day. My father's award ceremony. A military charity gala. Crystal lights, polished floors, men in suits, women wrapped in confidence and silk. And me, standing there in a simple black dress, hands trembling slightly, trying to remember how to breathe. My stepmother's eyes dragged over me, from my shoes to my collarbone, judging, measuring, deciding I didn't belong. "You people always try to pretend," she whispered again, venom dripping with every word. "But everyone can tell." I swallowed hard. I'd spent my whole life learning how to survive moments like this. Silence had always been my armor. Silence and patience. Because growing up poor teaches you something the rich never understand: how to wait. My father stood a few feet away, laughing with donors. His back turned like it had been so many times before. He didn't hear her. Or maybe he didn't want to. I looked down at the dress she was mocking. It wasn't designer. It wasn't loud. But it was mine. Bought with money earned from double shifts, sleepless nights, and sacrifices no one ever clapped for. And it carried a story she didn't know. She smirked, satisfied with my silence, and turned back toward her friends. "Honestly," she said louder now, "some people should know their place." That's when the sound of a cane striking the marble floor cut through the room. Tap, tap, slow, steady, heavy. An older man in a pressed military uniform walked toward us, his posture rigid despite his age. Medals covered his chest, catching the light with every step. Conversations died one by one as people recognized him. A decorated veteran. He stopped directly in front of my stepmother. "I'd like to know," he said calmly, his voice deep and controlled, "what exactly you meant by that." She froze. Her confident smile cracked just enough to show fear underneath. "Oh, nothing important." She laughed nervously. "Just a misunderstanding." He didn't smile back. "I spent 27 years watching good people get humiliated by those who thought money made them superior," he continued. "And I promised myself I'd never stay quiet again." He turned to me then, his eyes softening. "Young lady, do you know what that dress tells me?" I shook my head, barely trusting my voice. "No, sir. It tells me discipline, dignity, survival," he said. "Because I've seen that look in your eyes before. On soldiers who came from nothing and carried everything." The room was completely still. My stepmother tried to interrupt, her voice sharp. "This is inappropriate." "No." He cut her off, louder now. "What's inappropriate is teaching cruelty like it's class." People were staring openly now. Whispers rippled through the hall. My father finally turned around, confusion washing over his face as he took in the scene. The veteran faced him next. "You should be proud of her," he said. "Because while some people marry into wealth, others earn every inch of respect they stand on." My father looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing me for the first time in years. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The veteran turned back to my stepmother for the final blow. "And for the record," he said quietly, "this young woman funded half of the scholarships your husband's foundation brags about tonight." Her face drained of color. Gasps erupted around us. "What?" someone whispered. My heart pounded. I hadn't planned on the truth coming out like this. But the veteran knew because months ago, when I'd quietly donated my savings to help struggling veterans' families, he'd been the one who signed the letter thanking an anonymous benefactor. I'd never wanted recognition. I'd only wanted to make sure no one else felt as small as I once did. My stepmother stammered, grasping for control. That's impossible." I finally spoke. "It's not," I said softly. "I just never thought I needed to prove my worth to people who never earned theirs." Her friends stepped away from her like she was contagious. My father's voice shook. "Why didn't you tell me?" I met his eyes. Years of disappointment packed into a single breath. "You never asked." The silence that followed was heavier than any insult I'd ever swallowed. The veteran nodded once, satisfied, and gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze before walking away. Applause started slowly, uncertain at first, then stronger, louder, until the room was filled with it. Not for me. For the truth. My stepmother stood there, exposed, her power stripped away in front of everyone she'd tried to impress. That night, her words lost their sharpness. Her whispers lost their audience. And me, I stood taller, because revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's patient, sometimes it's quiet, and sometimes it arrives wearing dignity, medals, and the courage to finally speak. And from that moment on, she never looked down on me again. Because she couldn't. The applause eventually faded, but the damage didn't. It lingered in the way people looked at her afterward, measured, cautious, suddenly aware. Power is fragile when it's built on illusion, and hers had just cracked in front of everyone who mattered to her. She tried to recover. Of course she did. She laughed too loudly, straightened her posture, clung to my father's arm like proof she still belonged. But the room had shifted. Conversations no longer bent toward her. Compliments no longer landed. The air around her felt colder, thinner. I felt it too, but differently. For the first time in my life, I wasn't shrinking. My father pulled me aside near the balcony overlooking the city. The lights outside glittered like 1,000 quiet witnesses. He looked older, somehow smaller, as if guilt had finally found a place to sit on his shoulders. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" he asked again, softer this time. I watched traffic move below us, each car headed somewhere with purpose. "Because every time I tried, you were busy choosing peace over truth," I said. "And I learned early that silence was the only thing you'd listen to." His jaw tightened. He nodded slowly, as if admitting something painful to himself. "I failed you." The words didn't heal anything. But they mattered. Behind us, my stepmother watched. Her eyes were sharp, calculating. She already knew this wasn't over. People like her don't apologize, they retaliate. And she did. Over the next few weeks, rumors began to surface, subtle ones at first. Whispers about where my money came from. Suggestions that I'd exaggerated my contributions. Questions planted carefully, maliciously, so they'd bloom on their own. She smiled at me at breakfast like nothing had changed. "I hope you're enjoying the attention," she said sweetly one morning, stirring her coffee. Fame has a way of revealing things. I met her gaze calmly, so does desperation. Her smile twitched. She started digging into my past, trying to find cracks, old jobs, old friends, anything she could twist into scandal. But what she didn't know was that I'd spent years preparing for survival. I kept records. Receipts. Because when you grow up powerless, you learn to document everything. The charity board called a meeting. Anonymous concerns had been raised. My name came up. My stepmother sat there, hands folded, pretending concern while waiting for me to fall. I didn't. I walked in carrying a thin folder and years of restraint. They asked questions. I answered calmly. Then I placed the folder on the table and opened it. Donation records, bank statements, letters from beneficiaries. The veteran's handwritten note, dated months before the gala. Silence filled the room again, but this time it was sharp. Someone cleared their throat. "These contributions, they exceed what we were told." I nodded. "I never asked for credit. But I won't allow my integrity to be questioned to protect someone else's ego." Eyes turned toward my stepmother. She spoke quickly. "This is all very dramatic. Anyone can fabricate," a board member interrupted her. "Actually, we verified these records this morning." Her face stiffened. "And while doing so," he continued, "we noticed something else. Several donations claimed under your name were exaggerated." The trap closed quietly. She stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous." "No," I said softly. Finally standing too. "This is accountability." My father looked between us, horror dawning on his face as the truth assembled itself piece by piece. The board dismissed her from the meeting pending investigation. That night, she didn't come home. Neither did my father. Days passed. Then weeks. The investigation moved quickly. It turned out cruelty wasn't her only habit. She'd been skimming credit, inflating her image the same way she inflated her worth. When everything surfaced, the people who once admired her vanished overnight. Status is loyal only to itself. My father filed for separation quietly. He didn't ask me to forgive him. He didn't ask for comfort. He just nodded once when he told me, like a man who finally understood the cost of looking away. On the day she moved out, she found me in the living room. No makeup, no confidence, just anger and something close to fear. "You planned this," she hissed. I met her eyes without flinching. "No," I said. "I survived you. The truth did the rest." She laughed bitterly. "You think this makes you better than me?" I thought of the veteran. Of the families helped. Of the nights I cried alone and still showed up the next morning. "I think it makes me free." She left without another word. Life didn't magically become perfect after that. Healing isn't cinematic, it's quiet, uneven, sometimes lonely. But it was mine. Months later, I received an invitation to speak at a small veterans fundraiser. No spotlight. No glamour. Just stories and honesty. The veteran was there, sitting in the front row. Afterward, he shook my hand and smiled. "Told you dignity always wins." I smiled back. Only if someone's brave enough to protect it. As I walked out into the evening air, I wore the same black dress. Still simple. Still mine. And this time, no one dared question whether I deserved it. Because revenge doesn't always come with fire and screams. Sometimes it comes with truth. And that's the kind that lasts. The night air felt different after that fundraiser, lighter. Like something heavy had finally lifted from my chest. I walked to my car slowly, heels clicking against the pavement, replaying the veteran's words in my mind. Dignity always wins. For the first time I believed it. But healing has a way of testing you right when you think the worst is over. A week later, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. Almost. "Hello." There was silence on the other end, thin, controlled breathing. Then her voice. "I need to see you." My stepmother. I closed my eyes for a moment. The old instinct to brace myself kicked in like muscle memory. "Why?" I asked evenly. "Because you took everything from me," she snapped. "And I deserve answers." I almost laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. "You lost what you built on lies," I said. "That wasn't mine to give or take." She exhaled sharply. "You think you're so righteous now. Everyone sees you as some kind of hero?" "I never asked for that." "No," she said bitterly. "You just waited until I had an audience." I thought of all the times she'd humiliated me in kitchens, hallways, quiet corners where no one could see. "You never worried about audiences before." She went quiet again. Then softer, almost pleading, "Just meet me." "Please," I agreed. Not for her, but for myself. We met at a small cafe far from the neighborhoods she once flaunted. She looked smaller now. Not physically, but spiritually, like her confidence had been hollowed out. Her clothes were still expensive, but they hung differently, like costumes without a stage. She didn't waste time. "You enjoyed watching me fall, didn't you?" I met her gaze calmly. "No, I enjoyed watching the truth stand." Her eyes flashed. "You think the world is fair now? You think because you embarrassed me, your life suddenly means something?" My voice stayed steady. "My life always meant something. You just never bothered to look." She gripped her cup too tightly. "About what?" I asked. "That cruelty has consequences." She scoffed. "You wanted revenge?" I paused, then nodded once. "I wanted peace." Revenge was just the path you left open. That was the moment her anger cracked. Not into apology, but into exhaustion. "I don't know who I am without status," she whispered. I studied her carefully. This was the woman who once told me I didn't deserve what I wore, where I stood, who I was. And now, stripped of her armor, she looked lost. "That's something only you can figure out," I said gently. Just like I had to. We parted without closure. No forgiveness. No dramatic reconciliation. Just two women walking in opposite directions. One toward accountability, the other toward uncertainty. And strangely, that was enough. My life moved forward in quiet, meaningful ways. I downsized, moved into a place that felt like mine, not inherited, not borrowed. I kept working, kept donating, kept showing up where it mattered. My relationship with my father changed slowly. Awkward conversations, long pauses, attempts that didn't always land, but he tried, and that mattered too. One evening, months later, he handed me a small box. "I should have given you this years ago," he said. Inside was a medal, his, from early in his service. "I want you to have it," he continued. Not because you need proof, but because I need to remember who taught me what strength really looks like. My throat tightened. I took it carefully, like something fragile. Thank you, I whispered. That night, I placed the medal beside the veteran's letter, the donation receipts, the quiet symbols of a life rebuilt without noise. The irony wasn't lost on me, how the girl once mocked for being too poor had become rich in all the ways that matter. Time passed. The story faded from gossip circles, replaced by newer scandals, newer victims. But every now and then, someone would recognize me, not from wealth, but from impact. You're the one who stood up, they'd say. And I'd smile and answer honestly, I didn't stand up. I stopped kneeling. Years later, at another gala. This one smaller, humbler, I wore that same black dress again. Still simple, still unbranded, still powerful. A young woman approached me, nervous, eyes familiar in a way that made my chest ache. They told me I didn't belong here, she whispered. But then someone said I should talk to you. I took her hands gently. You belong anywhere you choose to stand, I said. Don't let anyone price your worth. As she walked away, shoulders straighter, I understood something at last. Revenge isn't about destroying someone else. It's about refusing to let them destroy you. And sometimes, the strongest response to cruelty is becoming undeniable. Years passed quietly after that night. The kind of years that don't announce themselves with drama, but leave their mark all the same. I learned the rhythm of peace. The unfamiliar comfort of waking up without dread, of entering rooms without bracing for judgment. It felt almost unreal at first, like borrowed time. But the past has a way of circling back when you least expect it. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. Rain tapping against my office window, emails half read, coffee gone cold. My phone lit up with a notification I didn't recognize at first, a news article, forwarded by a colleague with a single line beneath it. Isn't this your stepmother? I clicked. Her name stared back at me from the screen, attached to words like a fraud, a misrepresentation, ongoing investigation. Her photo was older now, harsher. The woman who once commanded rooms with a smile now looked like someone constantly looking over her shoulder. I felt nothing at first. No satisfaction. No anger. Just a distant ache, like touching an old scar you'd forgotten existed. Later that evening, I sat alone in my apartment, lights low. City humming beyond the glass. I thought about how badly I'd wanted revenge once. How I'd imagined it would feel like victory, like closure. But revenge hadn't been loud. It had been quiet, patient, almost invisible. And that realization unsettled me more than her downfall ever could. A few weeks later, I received a handwritten letter. The envelope was plain. The handwriting unfamiliar but careful. It was from her. She didn't apologize, not really. Instead, she wrote about losing friends, losing invitations, losing the mirror she'd used to see herself as powerful. She wrote about loneliness. About how silence sounds different when no one is afraid of you anymore. The last line stopped me coldly. I finally understand how small I made you feel. I carry that now. I folded the letter slowly and placed it in a drawer. I didn't respond. Some truths don't require replies. Around the same time, the veteran passed away. I found out through a short message from the foundation. No headlines, no cameras. Just a memorial service announced quietly, the way he'd lived. The church was small, filled with people who wore their respect instead of performing it. Soldiers. Families. People whose lives had been touched in ways that never make the news. I sat in the back, clutching the medal my father had given me. When it was my turn to speak, I hadn't prepared anything. I stood there, hands shaking, heart full. He reminded me. I said, voice steady despite the weight in my chest. That dignity doesn't need permission. That courage doesn't need applause. And that sometimes, the bravest thing you can do, is tell the truth when it costs you comfort. I placed the medal beside his photograph before I left. Outside the sky was gray, heavy with unshed rain. But I felt strangely whole. Life continued to open in unexpected ways after that. Opportunities I never chased found me anyway. Invitations to speak, to mentor, to listen. I never told my story the same way twice. Because it wasn't just mine. It belonged to anyone who'd ever been silenced by shame, overlooked by wealth, or taught that survival was the same as weakness. One evening, my father called. I'm proud of you, he said simply. I closed my eyes. For years, I'd imagined how that sentence would feel. I'd thought it would heal everything, it didn't. But it softened something sharp inside me. I'm glad, I replied. And I meant it. The last time I saw my stepmother was purely by chance. A grocery store aisle, fluorescent lights, no audience. She hesitated when she saw me, then nodded once. Not in challenge. Not in apology. Just acknowledgement. I returned the nod. We were strangers now, connected only by a history that no longer had power over me. As I walked away, I realized something quietly profound. She no longer mattered in the way she once had. And that was the final victory. Not because she'd fallen, but because I had risen beyond the need to watch. That night I stood on my balcony, city lights stretching endlessly ahead. I thought about the girl I'd been. The one standing in that gala hall, humiliated, silent, burning with questions about her worth. I wished I could tell her what I knew now. That pain doesn't get the last word. That silence can be a seed. That patience can become power. And that sometimes, the most devastating revenge, is becoming someone no insult can ever reach. I went inside, closed the door gently behind me, and turned toward a future that no longer needed to prove itself to anyone. Because I already knew who I was. The morning the city woke beneath a soft veil of fog, I realized something had finally settled inside me. Not anger, not victory, peace. It arrived quietly, the way truth always does, without ceremony, without witnesses. I stood by the window as sunlight slowly cut through the haze, touching buildings, streets. Lives moving forward without knowing what they'd survived to get here. I made coffee. Unrushed. No ghosts at the table with me anymore. For so long, my life had been shaped by reaction, enduring, absorbing, waiting. Every insult I swallowed had been stored somewhere deep. Not to poison me, but to teach me. I had learned restraint before I ever learned power. And that mattered. That afternoon, I received a message from the foundation. They wanted to name a new scholarship after the veteran. They asked if I'd help oversee it. I didn't hesitate. We built it slowly, intentionally. No grand announcements. Just real help reaching real people. Letters began to arrive, handwritten notes from young men and women who reminded me of myself. Tired, determined, unseen. One letter stayed with me longer than the others. A young woman wrote. They told me I was too poor to dream this big. But someone believed I deserved more. I folded the letter and held it to my chest. That was it. That was the end of the story I'd been living, and the beginning of something greater. Years later, I attended one final gala. Not because I needed to be there, but because someone else did. A scholarship recipient was receiving an award. She wore a dress much like mine had been, simple, honest, hers. I watched from the side as whispers moved through the room. I recognized the looks, the measuring eyes, the unspoken judgments. But this time I didn't feel anger. I felt readiness. When someone muttered something cruel near her, I stepped forward before the words could finish landing. She belongs here, I said calmly, clearly, loudly enough. The room turned. She earned this, I continued. And if that makes anyone uncomfortable, I suggest you ask yourselves why. Silence fell. Then applause, real this time, unforced, certain. The young woman looked at me with wide eyes. Gratitude, relief, recognition. I smiled and nodded once. That was when I understood the final truth. The circle had closed. I had become the voice I once needed. The presence that stops cruelty before it grows teeth. The proof that dignity doesn't come from money, bloodlines, or approval. It comes from endurance. From choosing grace without surrender, from carrying pain without letting it define you, from turning survival into purpose. Later that night, alone again, I stood in front of the mirror. I didn't see the girl who'd been humiliated. I didn't see the woman who'd been angry. I saw someone whole. Someone unafraid. Someone who had walked through fire and learned how to carry light. The words my stepmother once hissed no longer echoed in my mind. They had lost their meaning, their weight, their power. Because the truth had replaced them. I was never too poor, not in spirit, not in strength, not in worth. And the world had finally learned what I'd known all along, that the quiet ones are often the most powerful, and dignity, once claimed, can never be taken away. The city lights flickered on as night settled in, steady and sure. So was I. And that was the end of her story. But the beginning of mine.